thought that a man who married his teenage cousin, stumbled into a deep depression, and had a drinking problem would become one of the world's greatest writers. Edgar Allan Poe is a big part of the American culture. I've been a fan of him ever since 4th grade. He was a great author marked by tragedy and brilliance. You can tell that he is a great author marked by tragedy and brilliance by his life, death, afterlife, and his legacy. First of all, I will talk about his life. Edgar Allan Poe's parents were both traveling actors. They died when Poe was at a very young age. He then moves in with his foster parents. Later on, Poe decides to join the Marines. He does it illegally. He's only 16, but he claims to be 19 so that he can join. After the Marines, he moves in with his widowed aunt and his cousin Virginia. He then marries Virginia when she's only 13. Virginia dies at a very young age of tuberculosis. She dies a very violent death. Poe becomes very depressed over this. He starts a gambling addiction, which makes him lose all of his money, and he can no longer go to college because of this. With a tragic life comes a tragic death. The death of his wife makes Poe go into a deep depression. He gets a drinking problem. He drinks for many years. It gets so bad that, according to biography.com, he has to join a form of AA at that time. Later on, Poe is found on a plank outside of Baltimore unconscious. He is then taken to Washington College Hospital and dies 4 days later. The cause of his death is still very unknown. It is very mysterious today. Some people believe it might have been murder, syphilis, the flu, or even suicide. According to the University of Maryland Medical Department, they believe that it is rabies because he had many of the signs. He had a fast heartbeat, he was unconscious for long periods of time, and he had a fear of water. After his death comes his afterlife. His funeral was very small. Not a lot of people showed up. It was just his main family. And then, not long after his funeral, a train derails and goes straight into his gravestone, exploding it into pieces. It was later replaced with the number 80 and stayed that way for years. His wife's body, who was originally by her mother's, was then exhumed by a great flood and moved with him later on. For many years it stayed like this, until he finally became very famous, and then people decided to do a do-over funeral the right way in Baltimore, and he was reburied and people came to cherish his work and his life. After his death comes his legacy. He had an obituary in the New York Times, and it was entitled Ludwig. It was very popular. It spread all through the country. His home was then preserved as a museum called the Museum of Edgar Allan Poe in Richmond, Virginia. And then, although many people loved his work, it was slandered by his rivals. He was known as a crazed addict and drunken gambler. But although many people loved his work and many people hated his work, The Raven was one of his most popular. It became a movie, and it was also known as a football team called the Baltimore Ravens. They won the Super Bowl last year. The mascots of the Baltimore Ravens are Edgar, Allan, and Poe. Edgar Allan Poe is a great American writer. He lived a tragic life full of unfortunate events. His parents died, his wife died a tragic death at a very young age, and he stumbled into a drunk depression and a gambling problem. He was later found dead, and still people don't know how he died today. His life was made into movies, videos, and his literature is still well known. So remember, no matter how tragic your life may get, you can still become a legacy. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
What's your favorite Edgar Allan Poe work? The one you like the best?
I like The Raven. I also like, it's called The Concord Worm. It's kind of a funny poem.
So if he married his cousin when she was 13, how old was he when he married her?
He was 27. All right, well, thank you for listening.